Welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell, my co-host and the founder and CEO of Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day. On this week's episode, Wade is joining me to talk about how to take care of your mental and emotional health. We are sharing tips that we found work for us and for our clients, as well as using examples of people who have had to deal with high stress and mental health in the limelight, specifically a lot of people from the world of sports. So hopefully you will find a little bit of something that can help you out in your life. I also do just want to give you a heads up that we do talk about suicide in the context of mental health. And so if you or someone you know is struggling, please do not hesitate to reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, and we will also include a link to that information as well as a link to their online chat in the show notes. So with that, here is Wade and my conversation about mental and emotional health. So Wade, welcome back to the show this week. The topic we are going to dig into for the next little bit is this idea of taking care of your own mental and emotional health. Now, I want to kind of put a disclaimer on this whole conversation that you and I are not experts. We're not therapists. We're not counselors. We're not doctors. But that being said, I think there are things that all of us can kind of share from our own experiences, what we've learned as to how we really take care of ourselves. And we often talk about the topic of capacity, which I think this really fits under. And so I think there's something we all can share from that perspective. So you and I, we're going to take this from, our own experiences as well as maybe some stories we've heard of kind of people more in the spotlight of how it relates to this topic, and then kind of just share some insights that we've gleaned. Sound like a plan?
Yeah, let's take a stab at this. I think the more that we can shed light on these types of subjects, the better equipped others will be to address whatever it is in their own situation. As somebody put it, everybody's going through something. So by talking about it, we can bring some attention to it and hopefully handle each of those respective situations appropriately.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. So to get us started in this conversation, I'm just going to ask you the question, why is it important that we have this conversation? Obviously you just said, everyone's going through something, but I think a lot of times we can sort of get into the hustle and bustle of life and kind of shove down maybe some of our emotions, some of our feelings, some of our stresses. And so kind of talk through with me, like, why do you think it's important to talk about this, and maybe kind of what's your own angle that you're coming at this from?
Yeah, when I was growing up, and I don't know also for my wife Nicole, and I don't know if it was just kind of an era of this is what child rearing looked like at that time, because we're both 41 years old, and so kind of raises obviously a similar time frame. And when we were growing up, it was definitely put on a smiley face and don't talk about it. Don't bring attention to it. To ask for help is a sign of weakness and shows that you don't have your stuff all together. And that is something that we run into time and time again with coaching clients. It's not just agriculture. We'll talk about a couple other examples today, but asking for help is not a sign of weakness. And one example I'll use to kind of highlight that point is a coaching client that I had about a year and a half ago. So this would have been in the winter time or the start of winter. And this individual, this agronomy salesman, had just moved to another part of town. And I said, okay, so what's your challenge that in the upcoming week? And he starts to laugh and he says, well, my snowblower. My snowblower is not working, and they're talking snow tomorrow night. And I'm trying to figure out what to do, if I'm going to have to scoop the whole driveway by hand or what I'm going to have to do. And I just asked him, I said, so do you have a neighbor? He's like, yeah. Just go ask him to borrow a snowblower. And the salesman said, well, I can't do that. I'm new to the neighborhood. If I do that, it's going to look like I don't have my stuff together. And, I don't want to do that. And so I brought it back and looked at it from a different angle. I said, so how do you feel when you help someone? Well, I feel good. Okay. So by not asking for help, you are essentially keeping or preventing your neighbor from feeling good about himself. And when he thought about it, he's like, well, I guess so. And so we kind of talked through how asking for help is not a sign of weakness. And so he went, and the next week we checked back in, and he borrowed his neighbor's snowblower. And guess what? They had a good conversation about it, because a week before, his snowblower wasn't working. So they built a stronger relationship as a result of just being real and asking for help. Now that's kind of a little bit of a different angle on this whole topic, but it really comes back to vulnerability. And when you look at what it takes to build trust in any relationship, it takes vulnerability. And vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage, because if you think about what it takes to go over and ask somebody for help, is that, it takes courage to be able to do that. And so shifting from, insecurity and weakness into courage and seeing vulnerability as a sign of strength, that's really what is one of the root causes of all the stuff that we're going to be talking about today.
Definitely. Wade, I think you and I have been reading the same Brené Brown books, because there is pretty much exactly some of that thinking, both in Daring Greatly and in Rising Strong, which is the one I'm reading right now. And so it's funny you bring that up, because I actually was just reading the section in Rising Strong this morning that was talking about, in order, she asked people in companies, what does it take for you to trust somebody? And she and the people she was interviewing said, I really trust somebody when they know when they need to come and ask for help. And so that's just kind of funny that relates to exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, the book I'm actually reading right now, it is Brené Brown, and I thought it was just me, but it isn't. And it was one of the first ones that she had written, and was suggested by one of our partners. But what's interesting is the more I read and learn about this subject, the more engrossed I am in it. So I'm looking at my next 3 books that I have on my reading list, and they all have vulnerability and how that unlocks creativity and connection and performance. How things happen for a reason as a result of breaking down and showing what's really going on, and not putting up a front and hiding behind it. So the more I dig into the subject, Amanda, I guess the more engrossed I am in learning more and more about it.
Absolutely. It is. It's funny how you hear about one thing and it just sort of opens doors to all of these other things that are connected. So that's awesome. And I think that really is the foundation of what we're talking about today is, when we really struggle, I think, with our mental and or emotional health, a lot of it comes from trying to carry all that weight ourselves and not sharing it, not asking for help, thinking we're the only one who's going through whatever it is, or not wanting to burden others with our struggle. And yet
that vulnerability, that willing to share is the only cure to, not, maybe not cure isn't the right word, but it's the only way to sort of forge a connection to help you work through those things, whether they are, temporary and passing, or whether they're more chronic things. Even in the case of things that you deal with for a long time, being able to share it with someone else, being able to get insight from others, or just to feel like you have someone to talk to is a really critical part, of taking care of your brain and taking care of your emotions. And so, let's put this into some real tangible examples. Now, Wade, I know, we just talked about the whole list of books we're reading, on this subject of vulnerability and taking care of yourself. Uh, but I know some of what started getting you thinking about this were some, actually, like, athletes and celebrities, or people more in the spotlight, that have come forward with their stories of mental health or struggle. And so I'm curious. Share with me, some of the things that sort of brought this topic to your attention initially, or at least got you thinking about it more.
Yeah, the first article that I found, and trust me, as a lifelong Husker, I know you as a lifelong Spartan, you hear this name, and it's not exactly something that you want to go read about, but it was an article written about Urban Meyer. And obviously, here in recent weeks, Urban's name is being brought up for other reasons. We're not here to talk about that at this point, but this article that I found was about 2 years ago, and it just kind of called me to it. I put it off because I didn't want to read it, and it just called me back, and I read it, and it's just, oh my gosh, this is everything that people go through when they're dealing with that mental and emotional health issue. So, Urban Meyer was the head coach at the University of Florida. He won a couple of national titles down there, and it seemed like he was on top of the world. And out of the blue, he stepped down and said that it was for health reasons and because he needed to spend more time with his family. Well, this article, he with the Bleacher Report, he bears his soul in what was really going on. And he talked about how, he was putting so much pressure on himself to have the perfect season. They won a couple of national titles, but they always had one loss. And so it was never enough. And you just keep reaching higher and higher and higher, and you just burn yourself out. And what was interesting to me, Amanda, was that the conversation that was going on in his head was things that I was hearing earlier in my own career. It was things like, toughen up, man. You don't have time for this. Come on, what kind of a man are you if you're dealing with this kind of stuff? You can't show emotion, that kind of silly stuff that the inner voice is telling us from time to time. And what was interesting is as he stepped away and he started to reach out and ask for help, he read a couple of books that really changed his life. And the solution that he came away with was to develop daily practices that were basically the core of his daily schedule. And so he got his mental and emotional health back in order through these daily practices. And before he signed on later that year to be the head coach of Ohio State, he actually signed a contract with his family committing that he would never work more than 9 hours a day. And that's just one of the details. But in the past, it was always, pushed 16, 18 hours a day to prove how tough you are. And so making the shift included things like daily exercise and spending time one-on-one with his wife, reading his daily devotion. Those kinds of practices were the anchors to him being in a better mental and emotional state.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that you noted when we were talking about this earlier is that, he won national titles in both mindsets, right? He won them when it was push, 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 just toughen up, just deal with it, just, whatever. And he also won national titles under, a contract with himself and his family to take care of his body, to take care of his mind, to take care of his relationships, whatever. And so, I think the takeaway for me from that is to some extent, you can achieve quote unquote success in multiple different ways, right? There are people who will push, push, push and don't know another way. Um, but I think the question is, do you have to, right? Like, you know, if you say, in this specific example, right, he won those national titles under both mindsets, but I can probably take a guess at which one was more fulfilling, which one was felt less stressful, which one, felt more rewarding. And I'm going to guess it's the one where, he's only working 9 hours a day and he's making time for his family and he's making time for himself. And I just think that's a lesson to all of us that, you probably can. I know we have clients who said that, right? Like, I'm doing fine, just pushing, pushing, pushing. The question just becomes, what are you sacrificing on the back end to get that success? And what would happen if you asked yourself, could I have both? Right? Could I take care of my mental, my emotional health? For some of us, some of us we've even written off, can we take care of our physical health? And can I achieve the success that I want? And I think this is an example of somebody in a very high profile position saying yes, and that is possible. Will it be hard some days? I'm sure there are days where he wanted to spend 12, 14, 16 hours watching tape or in practice or whatever. And that it's hard to say no, but I would probably guess that in the long run, the outcomes are worth it. So that to me is kind of one of the big takeaways is you can have that success. The question is, are you willing to challenge yourself to have success in a way that is not so hard on your brain, your emotions, that sort of thing?
Yeah, actually, when Urban was asked about winning a title at Ohio State and the difference between the before and after, when he won at Florida, his mind immediately went to, okay, tomorrow now I hit the recruiting trail, and what's next? He actually described it as kind of a hollow feeling that we work all year long and that's it, and what's interesting is one of the books that Urban read, it's called The Only Way to Win by Jim Lohr, and it's about Jim Lohr has actually worked with Fortune 500 executives, with Olympic athletes and professional athletes. And he said everybody is caught up in the same race. They think, I will be happy when. And they get to that corner suite and they think, okay, I've got it. I should be happy now. And it feels hollow. It feels empty, because they build up in their mind that success is a title, or I will be happy when type mentality. And this book is about how building character drives higher achievement, and this is the key, greater fulfillment in anything that you're doing in life. And so when Urban won at Ohio State, he was actually taking time to connect with his players. And he said, I remember what they were feeling in that moment. And he said, thinking back, I can't remember anything when I was winning at Florida, because I was so caught up on what's next. And so it's a trap, it's a race, that we get caught up in our own ego. And when we do that, we lose sight of what's most important.
Absolutely. The other thing from this story that I just want to go back and kind of run a highlighter over is the importance of those daily practices. If you've ever worked with us, you've heard of the Thrive with Five, which is a series of small daily actions designed to do exactly this, to support your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health. And I think this is just a testament to when those things become routine, when those things become your standard. It really We talk about the concept of kaizen, right? Small, seemingly insignificant actions that build up over time. And I think the Thrive with Five, the actions that he mentioned in the article are a really good example of that. I think sometimes people dismiss them as, oh, why do I have to exercise? Or, oh, why do I have to do something nice for someone? Why do I have to tell somebody I appreciate them every single day? But when we do these very small things, they really do create a big impact over time. So that's just the other thing I wanted to sort of point out in that example is the importance of small daily actions. So, go ahead.
Yeah, you need to fall in love with the process, not just, you know, think about your own value or worth in terms of, that next result. And when you embrace and, learn to love the process and, the king eats first, the queen eats first type mentality, when we do those things, then it's sustainable success over the long term. It's not the ups and the downs based on, what happened to me next.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about your next example. Talk to me about Kevin Love. This guy's a basketball player, right?
Yeah. So Kevin Love, Cleveland Cavalier forward. Um, and this was just something that, I just found here in the last couple of months, Amanda, but I didn't realize that he became the spokesperson for this message. But essentially, was having very good success in his NBA career and was playing in a game and actually suffered from a panic attack and, ran into the tunnel and, the team doctors followed him and got him some help. But his big thing at the time was that he was scared that other people would find out. And so that's one of the reasons why he wanted to become the spokesperson for, this issue, is to just shed some light on this, that, hey, asking for help, once again, not a sign of weakness. But with him, the breakthrough that he totally underestimated was to go talk to a therapist. And, he was very, very skeptical when he first went in. But after a couple of conversations, he grew to look forward to those conversations, because it created a space for him to talk through some of the stuff that was going on. And in his particular situation, here he is, an NBA basketball player, and in another city every night of the season. And during the season, his grandmother passed away very unexpectedly, and his grandmother was very, very close with him. And but because of where they're at in the season, his inner voice told him, "I have to focus on basketball. I'll deal with this later. Come on, be a man." Kind of similar to the Urban Meyer self-talk. And what was interesting is when that topic came up when he was talking with his therapist, he came to realize that he never took time to mourn. He never allowed himself to grieve. And he was still not forgiving himself for not being there for her and saying his goodbyes and being at her funeral. And so talking through that very sensitive subject allowed him to process through the loss of his grandmother. And it's just interesting, said once he did that, it was just like the weight of the world just fell off his shoulders. And I think, you and I, through coaching, we've seen those types of scenarios where somebody has that breakthrough, that aha moment, and it's just like weight is just shed from their body.
Absolutely. I mean, it's another example, right, of keeping it all in and letting it eat at you, and then the power of what happens when you let it out, right? And so yeah, I think that's a really great example. You know, I, I love that the title of the article is "Everyone is Going Through Something," which is the phrase you used at the front of this. But I think sometimes we think, in one case, right, we think that with celebrities, people in the spotlight, that everything's perfect because they're rich, they're on TV, they're in movies or whatever. Or maybe we don't. I mean, I think we've all known the hot messes of those too. But I think there are certain people, right, we sort of put up on a pedestal that everything must be great because they're in this position, right? But I think we do the same thing with the people around us as well. Like, if people aren't letting us in or telling us things, then we think that everything in their life must be perfect, in which case then we then denigrate ourselves because we go, oh, they seem to have it together, so I must be the only one who's a hot mess and screwing up. And I think this example with Kevin Love is a perfect example of, from the outside looking in, people might think, oh, he's got it all together, but on the inside he's falling apart, and he needed to find somebody who he could open up and allow them to see him really in all of his dimensions, to be able to truly work through some of those mental, emotional struggles that he was going through at the time.
Yeah, you brought up Brene Brown earlier, and one of the things that I heard her say a few weeks ago that I'll never forget, but all of this comes back to vulnerability. And whenever you hear somebody say, and this is Brene speaking, whenever you hear somebody say, oh, I don't do vulnerability, in Dr. Brown's words, she said, I guarantee you, without any more information, they are very good at guilt and at shame, not just of other people, but also of themselves. So having that vulnerability is what it takes to process through those difficult situations. And one interesting thing I just read last night is the better equipped you are at processing through this stuff, the more empathetic you are as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you can realize that, I'm going through this and I need to share with somebody else, you start to realize that, oh, everybody's going through their own version, and maybe I can create the space for them to share as well. Yeah, I think that's a really great call out. The last example that you have on here is a gentleman by the name of Jay Williams. And I know only from the notes that he is also with basketball. I just want to say, I am not as terrible at sports as it's sounding like I am in this episode right now. Kevin Love sounded.
No
Kevin
judgment,
Love, that
Amanda.
name sounded familiar, and I was pretty sure I was right with basketball. But Jay Williams is one that I don't recognize as much, I don't think, unless maybe I saw his face or something. So, but I appreciate you put in the notes that he's a basketball person. But I will let you tell the story, because clearly I don't know much more than that.
All right. Well, I just got off the phone with a 40-year-old regional sales manager for an agronomy team who had not heard of Jay Williams either, Amanda. So you're
That
safe.
makes me feel so much better.
All right. So Jay Williams, he was a two-time collegiate player of the year at Duke University, playing for Coach K. And he was the number 2 overall draft pick in the NBA draft. He had won the lottery. And in this interview that he did with Tom Bilyeu in Impact Theory was just outstanding. But it just had to do with talking about the process and how, he thought he had made it, and it wasn't just him making it, but now he could take care of all of his family, and they didn't have to worry about anything ever again. And so, the responsibility that he felt. And I think he was just in his second season in the NBA and was, starting to break through. But he made one decision that changed the course of his life forever. And that was he was on a motorcycle with no helmets or protection or anything like that, and crashed into a utility pole going 70 miles an hour. And his NBA career was done. And so he went from, being the next Michael Jordan. He literally had just been assigned Michael Jordan's locker, being the face of the Chicago Bulls for the next decade, to now what? And, in his own words, he talked about how he had tied his identity to basketball, and that was taken away. And he tried making a comeback, but was unsuccessful. And during that process, he actually tried committing suicide 2 separate times, because he thought, if I can't do this, then who am I? And one of the things, Jay Williams wrote a book just processing through all of this stuff. And it took him the better part of a decade to work through it all. And he said, I'm no longer angry that this happened to me, but yet there's still, things that he's working through as a result, because it was such a life-changing event. But his book, it's called Life is Not an Accident, and it's a memoir of reinvention. But he had to shift, basketball being his identity to, basketball is just something that I do. I am Jay Williams, and I play basketball. I'm not a basketball player. And when he made that shift, after doing a lot of work and intensive training to break through all of this stuff, he came out a better person. And it was interesting. He talked about how, some of the most successful people in the world that he knew personally, CEOs of companies, they surround themselves with a core group of people. And he said, he brought up the example of how, if you ever see a CEO before he goes and meets with his board of directors, they're nervous, because they know that they are responsible for what the company's been doing up to this point and where they're going after this. And these people are going to hold them accountable to it. And what's interesting is Jay, up to that point, had surrounded himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear, because they wanted to hang on to the star that was the second pick overall in the NBA draft. And what he needed to do was work on himself and to surround himself with people who would hold him accountable to the little things that he did on a daily basis. And that's kind of a long explanation of what happened, but he now is an analyst for ESPN and doing a great job. And just, I can't wait to read into his book more, to learn more about what he did to get to the other side of this life-changing event.
As you tell that story, I feel like there's a lot of parallels to folks we work with, or the customers of the folks we work with in the agriculture industry. Now, obviously, there's probably some people listening to this who are not involved in ag, but for those who aren't familiar, right, the ag industry is very hard right now. Especially for certain sectors of farming, it's really tough. And so I think you hear this conflict between who I am versus what I do a lot when it comes to farming, and especially when economics are tough, right? So, if I've been a dairy farmer my entire life and the dairy market is in the crapper right now, and I'm looking at, do I keep farming, not making any money, or do I get out? Then how do I reconcile that I've been a dairy farmer my entire life, and who am I without that? Right. And obviously there are other sectors of the industry facing some of those similar challenges. And Mark and I have mentioned in the past, some of the high rates of depression and suicide among the farming community. Because of that challenge is, how do I separate who I am from what I do? And so I think Jay's story is a really good example of I am more than just what I do. And that may not feel like it, in the moment. And it, it may be hard to hear that from someone on the outside looking in, right? I could imagine somebody probably at some point looked at Jay and said, "You're not just a basketball player, you're all of these other things." And he probably wanted to say, "You just don't understand. You don't know. Like, you don't know me," right? So, and I
Right.
think probably in our
Right.
realm, there are farmers who, if I said, "You're more than just a farmer," they'd say, "No, you don't understand," right? And so I can totally empathize with that, but I think it is really important to make that distinction that there is more to you than just what you do. Go ahead.
But that statement, "you don't understand," um, and trust me when I say that I hear this in relationships outside of work. Um, that statement is a distancing statement. It's about, I am isolated. Nobody else has this situation. I'm by myself, and it is, for lack of a better way to say it, it's a defense mechanism to try to distance themselves from the other individual who is trying to empathize with what's going on. And so asking questions about, okay, so tell me, what don't I understand? Just getting people to, and it doesn't always work, but if we can get people to open up and talk more, hopefully we can get them to realize that they're not in this alone, that people do care, and we're here to listen and to empathize.
Which I think reiterates the other point from Jay's story that I think applies to so many other people, is looking at who you surround yourself with, making sure that you are surrounding yourself with people who really care about you, not just in one capacity, but in all capacities. They may only be your friend or whatever for a single capacity, right? Like, you may know them just because of your job, but that doesn't mean that they don't care about you as a whole person beyond just that role you fill in your job. So, being very cognizant of who's in that sphere of people that are very close to you, and do they really care about you in all aspects and not just in one aspect that maybe what you're most known for, or maybe what you have the most attachment to, or whatnot. Those people are really important.
Yeah, when you look at some of the most high-profile people, celebrities who um, you know did not finish life the way they sought out. But I'm thinking of people like Elvis Presley, um, like Howard Hughes. So these people, because they had so much wealth and fame, they were enabled to do things in their life that were not in their best interest. And they surrounded themselves with people who would get them what it is they wanted in the moment instead of what they needed long term. The flip side of that is Johnny Cash, and I'm just going off of the movie here, so I'm taking it as the movie is accurate. But when June basically said, "This is it. You are not doing this anymore," that was the turning point for him to get rid of all of the bad influences who had surrounded himself in his life.
I think we need to all have one or two people who can, to not have a better phrase, call us on our bullshit when we need a little wake up call every now and again. Sometimes we don't like those people very much, but they can be really valuable in times when maybe we're telling ourselves a story that actually isn't true, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about here as well.
And that was one of the things that Jay Williams learned about himself after the accident. When he did find somebody who would tell him what he needed to hear rather than just what he wanted to hear, one of the things they brought up is, yeah, you don't realize you're doing it, but you tell these little white lies, and you don't have to do that. And every time you do that, I trust you less. And you say you're going to be here at 9:00 and you show up at 9:10. And it's how you do those little things on a daily basis that builds your reputation and your character as an individual. One last thing I was going to say, we talk about tying our identity. It's not just your professional career, though. Some people's identity is, I'm a father, or I'm a husband, or a spouse. And, one of the examples that Jay Williams actually talked about was an attorney friend of his, very prolific attorney I believe in Chicago, whose wife and kids left him. And what that gentleman went through, Jay recognized as, oh my gosh, his divorce is the equivalent of my accident. It's just a different vertical. And so being careful that our identity is not tied to something other than this is who I am and I have value as an individual person.
Or to layer onto that, not overweighting one identity versus another, right? Like, it's important that you're a parent or a spouse. It's important that you're a farmer or an attorney. The problem I see is when one is heavily weighted versus the other. I think about it in business, right? If you've got one client or one customer who makes up 80% of your portfolio, you're putting yourself in a risky position, right? And it's the same thing with our personal identities. When we put so much stock into only one or two pieces, if that goes away, we put ourselves at risk for some serious stress. And so again, just kind of looking across the board, it's not that those things aren't important, but are they weighted appropriately in the portfolio of your self-identity? So we have talked about Urban Meyer and how he kind of changed his approach to his own mental and emotional health between his time at Florida and his time at Ohio State. We talked about Kevin Love and how he really sought out asking for help after kind of a couple of different, severe experiences, whether it was the panic attack on the court or his grandmother passing away. And then Jay Williams and really separating that identity, who I am versus what I do, and surrounding yourself with good people to help you work through that process. So I think a lot of good techniques and approaches have come out through some of these examples. But Wade, let's just kind of walk through. Some of them will be familiar that we've already talked to. I think there's some new ones as well. But as you think about these stories and others, what are some of the things that you would, what advice would you give to other people who want to sort of take better care of their own mental and emotional health?
Yeah. So like you said earlier on, we are not the experts here, but these are things that we have found value in, and our coaching clients have embraced and seen a positive return when they use on a daily basis. So number one, ask for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage. And so redefining what that means. But it's other things. It's, exercising and eating right. And it's amazing how many times just getting out and getting 15 minutes of exercise, your performance, how you show up at work is going to be totally different. It does directly apply with the results that you get. Other things, more on the spirituality side. So meditation, maybe daily devotion, connecting spiritually, that goes a long ways in getting out of your self-focus into something much bigger than just you. For me personally, I'm all about self-improvement. So taking in positive content, it just reshapes where my head is at. So reading, listening to audiobooks, podcasts, YouTube, just when you take in that positive information, you're going to feel differently, which is going to lead to different actions, whatever the situation is. Other things that we've seen a ton of value in is, or one in particular is journaling. So just sitting down, pen and paper, and just writing through it. For me personally, and for others that I work with, it's amazing how much better you feel when you just write through all the different thoughts and feelings associated with a given situation.
One quick note on journaling, and I don't have the book in front of me, so I can't quote it. But in the Brene Brown book I'm reading, she does mention that there is actually some research around the power of journaling, even in some cases, over talking to other people, at least in the early stages of processing things. So, like we mentioned earlier, like it's really important to talk it out and to talk to other people. But I think we can all understand situations where there's a fear of talking because of fear of judgment, or maybe our own self judgment about what we're feeling, and that actually some of the first times you're working through something, writing it down where there's no judgment, you don't have to read it to anybody, you just like brain dump. I've even heard Brene Brown and other people talk about, like, that's when your inner 5-year-old gets to come out. That's when you just get to really say what's on your mind. So just want to do another plug for journaling on hard topics, because there are some benefits to journaling in the early stages that might make the talking out loud about it easier down the line. So just a added plug there.
Yeah, I actually use that technique with my coaching clients. So I'll ask them a question and they want to respond. They want to just tell me the answer. I said, no, pull out pen and paper and I want you to write it out. And the reason, or a couple of the reasons why I've found that is a better process is when I just give you the answer, a lot of times it's a flippant answer. It's not well thought out. And when you start writing it out, sometimes it's amazing what comes out instead of just answering to try to move to the next question. So there is definitely value in writing things out.
Good deal. All right, I cut you off so you can keep going down your list of techniques. I just wanted to make sure I got that in.
No, that's great. The other book that I was thinking of is Loving What Is by Byron Katie. And that is one of the things that she talks about in doing the work is, write out what you're thinking, what are you feeling, what are you thinking around this specific topic that's triggering you. And the questions that Katie asks are, is that true? And, people answer yes or no, or mostly, or whatever. The second question is, do you know with 100% certainty that is true? And that 100% certainty is often the trigger point that, okay, I know with 95% certainty, but not 100. And so why are we spending time, stewing over this situation when we don't know with 100% certainty that even took place or that was their intention? And so shifting that and just the third question is who would I be if I told myself a different story? That's one of the best books that Nicole has ever read, and she has shared with a number of her best friends. As they, just once again, everybody is going through something, so let's equip ourselves with some better tools to be able to process through it.
Absolutely. And I think the other things that we might have, everything else I think has come up a little bit. Surrounding yourself with positive people. We talked about that in Jay Williams' story. I think finding opportunities to help other people can be a really good way of helping your own mental and emotional health, right? Because sometimes the reason why we're stressed out or we're beating ourselves up is because we're only focused on ourselves. And sometimes focusing on other people can be either a break from beating ourselves up, or a good perspective check that maybe the thing we're beating ourselves up about is not as gigantic as it feels in the moment. So, that's volunteering or, helping a neighbor or I think there's lots of ways that you can do that, but kind of taking the focus off yourself for a little bit can be really helpful as well. The last thing on this list that I wanted to touch base on is this idea of self affirmations. And I know, Wade, you had an example of this, and I'm going to guess this goes back to tackling that negative voice in your head that just tells you to toughen up or whatever. So share that with us real quick.
Yeah, that's something that shifted my career in a dramatic fashion and took place 9 years ago. But it was, a recording I mentioned in other podcasts, but it was simply, junk in, junk out. So if all you take in is negative information, how do you think you're going to feel? Probably not very good. And so how are you going to respond? Not very well. And so the author, Coach Joe Gillum, he was talking about how, you take in self-help books and you take in positive information and podcasts. And when you do, you're going to respond differently. And one of the things that he talked about was, reprogramming that voice in your head. And I know for me personally, where I was at that state, that point in my career, I was not in a good place. And when I started to take in that positive information, fulfill that self-improvement strength that I have, that's when things started to shift. And that's when my career took off. And that's when my personal life took off, because I started looking for the opportunity instead of just what was wrong. And I started to take 100% responsibility for my life and the choices that I make, instead of, blaming somebody else for why things were done a certain way. So for me, telling myself again and again and again, I am a positive leader. I influence people to be better than what they thought was possible. And when I tell myself those affirmations again and again and again, it shut out that negative voice that was always telling me, gosh, that was so stupid. I can't believe you said that. All of those negative things that our inner ego just loves to replay again and again and again.
Yep, absolutely. It's something I think we all struggle with at some point. Maybe it's an ongoing challenge we're always dealing with, but those affirmations and changing that self-talk is super important. So as we wind down here, I think a lot of the things, Wade, that we've talked about are things anybody can do, right? Exercising, journaling, doing the affirmations, surrounding yourself with people who support you and who care about you, like that goes across the board. We all can probably take some steps to improve on taking care of ourselves in those ways. But I don't want to neglect that sometimes you're going to need a little extra help than some of those daily practices. So just a couple of notes I want to make sure we don't neglect here is please watch out for numbing behaviors, right? So if you find yourself, maybe it's eating or something more serious like drugs or significant alcohol, like please don't be afraid to ask for help, or just watch for those in yourself, because that might be or in others, because it could be a sign that maybe some additional help is needed. And if you need to talk to a professional like a therapist, definitely we always support that if that's something that can be useful, or maybe a medical doctor. I know a lot of people who for them medication is part of their mental health journey, and I would never take that away from somebody who it's helpful for. So again, if you're dealing with something maybe on a bigger level, please do not hesitate to pull in additional assistance, because I think if there's one takeaway message that I hope, Wade, you and I have covered, it's that there should be no shame in taking care of your own mental and emotional health. We want you to be at your best, and dealing with your tough feelings or the stresses that are going on in your life is a really key part of that. And so the only way it's going to get better is if we keep talking about it, and sometimes that means pulling in help from lots of different angles. So again, I know it feels like there's maybe some shame around this topic, but there really shouldn't be. And I know our team here will support you in whatever way you need to help yourself take care of those things. So, Wade, any other thoughts as we wind down here?
Yeah, we talk about how vulnerability takes courage. And one of the most courageous people that I know, my wife, Nicole, she asked me to share that a few years ago, she started taking a mild antidepressant. And she wanted me to share with you that it's not about, you were talking about the numbing behaviors, the drugs, alcohol. It's not about taking away emotion. It's about taking, if you think of the ups and the downs, it's about taking out the bottoms. And so, if you're in a situation where you just don't want to get out of bed in the morning, and that's just one example, but it's probably time to go have a conversation with a medical professional. And I just really appreciate the fact that Nicole is so courageous to share those things, just to make sure that other people are aware that they're not alone.
Yeah, you'll have to tell Nicole thank you from me as well for sharing that story. I would agree. Some of my friends and colleagues, who I would say are some of the bravest people I know, are the ones who are the most vocal about some of the real challenges that they've dealt with. And so it's funny how we see vulnerability in ourselves as shameful, but we see vulnerability in others as courage. And so I would just challenge folks to sort of think about how you can reframe that, how you can reframe your own vulnerability, as you never know who near you needs to see your courage in order that, they can pull that out of themselves as well. So thank you to Nicole for sharing that. Good deal. Well, Wade, thank you again for coming on the show this week and talking about what is a really important topic, and I think comes up for us quite frequently, actually, because again, everyone's going through something. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you in not too long.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thanks again to Wade for joining us on the pod this week. To connect with him further, just look for Wade Johannes on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Snapchat. If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback, and it also helps other people find the show. As always, if you're looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewel Speaking and Training on all the major social networks. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.